I am an old man now, bones tired, mind fading, but one sound still follows me into every night, the sharp, tearing shriek of steel breaking under black water. It was the last thing my crew ever heard. For decades, I've carried that sound like a wound that never closes because the truth behind it was locked away, buried under government orders and sealed reports. They told me to forget, to let the ocean keep its secrets. But silence has grown heavier than death itself. And before my time finally runs out, I need to speak, need to tell what really happened down there in the cold darkness, where hope drowned long before the ship did. I always tell people the Korean War was fought in two worlds, one above the water where guns roared and nations clashed, and one below where darkness swallowed sound, hope, and sometimes entire ships. I was barely 20 when the Navy made me a diver, trained to slip into black water filled with mines, wreckage, and the unknown. The cold was a living thing there, biting through every layer of gear until it gnawed at bone. Ships came back scarred, crew wounded, metal torn open like paper. Many never returned at all. Mines drifted under the waves like invisible predators, and every time we heard a distant thud or a low tremble across the hull of our vessel, we knew another ship had met its end. I was young, determined, foolishly brave, the kind of courage that comes before you learn the true weight of fear. That fear finally introduced itself on the night we lost the Mercy Dawn. It was past midnight when the radio room erupted with static-laced shouting. A hospital ship, the Mercy Dawn, had gone silent after reporting a mine blast near its stern. A hospital ship wasn't supposed to be anywhere near combat, but war does strange things to roots and luck. The final transmission said its lower decks were flooding fast, engines dead, and more than a dozen doctors and nurses were trapped in the infirmary hold. After that, nothing, no lights, no radio, just the ocean breathing heavily against the night. Command feared the ship might capsize at any moment. Others whispered that enemy submarines might be nearby, waiting to finish the job. But all I could think about was the people trapped inside, a place meant to heal becoming their tomb. Minutes later, our commanding officer called my team into the briefing compartment. His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, tight fists, knuckles white. "You're going down," he said. "Now." No time to plan, barely any time to prepare tanks or check gear. We were warned enemy subs had been spotted earlier in the evening. We might not only be rescuers, we could become targets. But hesitation had no place there. The hospital ship was sinking inch by inch, carrying people who couldn't save themselves. We signed off on our oxygen charts, sealed our suits, checked each other's gear one final time, and then stepped toward the open sea, where the night seemed darker than usual. The moment I slipped beneath the surface, the world changed. Sound vanished first, replaced by a thick, crushing silence that pressed against my ears. The cold hit next, clawing through my suit as if the ocean wanted to peel it off my skin. My breathing echoed inside my helmet in slow, rhythmic bursts. Visibility was zero. Our flashlights cut only a small cone through the murky blackness. Each kick of my fins stirred clouds of silt and rust that drifted like ghosts around us. Somewhere far below, the Mercy Dawn groaned, metal bending under pressure, like an animal exhaling its last painful breaths. My heartbeat thumped loudly. I kept imagining the ship collapsing entirely before we even reached it, burying everyone inside. The descent felt endless, a slow fall into a world stripped of light, warmth, and certainty. When the silhouette of the Mercy Dawn finally emerged, it looked less like a ship and more like a giant, wounded carcass rotting on the seafloor. Its hull was ripped open, beams jutting out like broken ribs. We maneuvered toward a breach just wide enough for us to squeeze through. Inside, silence ruled. Dead bodies floated gently in the dim water, drifting as though caught in slow-motion sleep. Medical trays, syringes, bandages, all suspended weightlessly like forgotten memories. The ship creaked and popped, each sound reverberating through the flooded corridors like a ticking clock running out of time. My flashlight beam quivered every time my hand trembled. The deeper we swam inside, the more twisted the hallways became, the more claustrophobic everything felt. War wounds on a vessel meant to save lives. Just when despair began tightening its grip, I heard it, faint metallic tapping. At first I thought it was the ship groaning again, but then the tapping came in a rhythm. A message, a plea. We followed the sound down a collapsed corridor where a metal beam had barricaded the infirmary hold. Behind it, through a narrow gap, flashlights reflected off desperate faces, doctors half submerged, shivering, exhausted. One nurse pressed her hand through the gap as if reaching for salvation itself. Their air pockets were shrinking, panic hovered in their trembling voices, but they were alive. And so we had to move. Just as we prepared to cut the beam, the entire ship shifted violently. A deep, bone-rattling groan surged through the steel. Debris rained down in the water, a cabinet ripped free and tumbled past me. One diver barely dodged a falling pipe. I felt the floor tilt beneath us, pushing us sideways. Panic flashed through my mind. If the ship rolled even a few degrees more, it could trap us for good. Our team leader ordered steady breathing, steady hands, but fear had already seeped into the water around us like ink. We activated underwater cutters and began slicing through the thick beam. Sparks burst underwater like tiny stars before fading into darkness. The trapped doctors coughed, cried, and shouted instructions only they could understand. Minutes felt like hours. Water levels inside the hold kept rising. Soon there would be no air pocket left. We worked faster, pushing our gear to its limits. A doctor held a young nurse above the waterline, refusing to let her slip under. Every second mattered. Every cut felt like it carried the weight of a life. Just as the final section of the beam began weakening, a sudden rumble shook the ship. A secondary explosion, maybe a lingering charge, maybe another mine fragment, detonated somewhere near the bow. The shockwave tore through the corridors. I was thrown backward, slamming into a wall, my vision blurring. Debris surged in the water like a storm. The beam we had been cutting twisted violently, sealing the gap completely. Our access route vanished behind a cloud of collapsed steel. Shouts from the doctors turned into muffled echoes. My team scattered, disoriented. In that moment, I knew the ship was dying and it was taking its passengers with it. Through the chaos, I saw movement. One doctor clinging to a broken stretcher, struggling to stay afloat. I reached him, grabbed his arm, and stabilized him against the shifting wall. He looked into my eyes with a clarity I will never forget, resignation mixed with pleading. "Save yourself, please," he whispered, voice trembling through his rebreather. Behind him, the others were already lost beneath debris and rising darkness. He knew it. So did I. I didn't have the strength to pull him out. I barely had the strength to stay conscious. The ship groaned again, a long, hollow scream as the hull bent inward. The ceiling above us cracked, announcing its final collapse. My oxygen gauge dipped toward red. The doctor pushed me away with whatever remained of his strength. "Go," he shouted, and I did, not because I wanted to, but because staying would mean joining the dead. I swam through a fractured corridor, dodging falling beams and swirling debris. The pressure increased as the ship sank deeper. By the time I escaped through a gash in the hull, I could hear the muffled cries of the last survivors fading beneath the weight of thousands of tons of water. When I broke the surface, the night air burned my lungs. I clung to a rescue line as I looked back. The Mercy Dawn was almost gone, only its bow barely visible. Within seconds, it slid beneath the waves, disappearing into blackness. No explosion, no flare, just silence. A hospital ship full of healers, swallowed whole by the sea. The narrator, now an old and retired Navy diver, carries the kind of exhaustion that lives in the bones, not the body. Time has taken his strength, but guilt has taken his peace. He speaks with the quiet tone of a man who has replayed one night of his life thousands of times, searching for a different ending that never came. Standing beside him in those memories is Captain Reed, a calm, strategic leader whose steady voice guided the entire dive team through fear and darkness. Reed never panicked. His presence alone felt like a rope to hold on to in the shifting black waters. Then there was Lieutenant Morgan, the narrator's closest friend, a diver who always knew how to steady his breath when panic clawed at his ribs. Morgan's humor, courage, and quick thinking kept the narrator alive more times than he can count. Trapped deep inside the sinking ship was Dr. Evelyn Parker, the lead doctor whose bravery never wavered even as the water rose around her. Her steady voice was the last source of hope in those flooded corridors, until the collapse took her life. And finally, Dr. Lee, the youngest trapped medic, the only survivor the narrator reached. His fading, trembling last words still echo inside the narrator's heart, long after the ocean swallowed the rest. The emotional backbone of the story rests on the narrator's lifelong struggle with surviving a night that claimed so many others. He admits that the heaviest part of growing old isn't age, it's guilt. The guilt of rising to the surface when better men never did. Every breath he takes feels borrowed, every sunrise a reminder that dozens never saw theirs. This guilt follows him like a shadow, especially whenever he hears the sound of water dripping, echoing the slow flooding of the ship. Underwater, the silence was its own kind of terror. It wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Every kick of his fins felt too loud, every metal creak felt like a warning, and the emptiness around him made him question each move. That oppressive silence made him painfully aware that one wrong touch, one wrong breath, could bury him in the steel coffin alongside the trapped doctors. His heartbeat echoed louder than anything else, reminding him constantly that he was alive in a place filled with the dying. Then came the moment that shattered him, the first tapping sound. Desperate, rhythmic tapping from behind a sealed corridor. It was hope. It was horror. Those taps said, "We're alive," but they also said, "We are running out of time." When he found the trapped doctors and heard their trembling voices, he felt the crushing weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. The secondary explosion killed Lieutenant Morgan, his closest friend. One moment Morgan's hand was on his shoulder, steadying him, grounding him. The next, a violent blast tore the corridor open and swallowed Morgan into darkness. The narrator never saw him again. That loss tore a hole inside him that never healed. Holding young Dr. Lee's hand as the ship collapsed was another wound. Lee's shaking fingers tried to grip strength from the narrator's glove, but water and debris were already tearing them apart. When Lee whispered his final words, something inside the narrator cracked forever. But the moment that truly broke him was watching the entire hospital ship sink from the surface, silently, almost peacefully, taking every trapped scream, every desperate plea, every lost heartbeat with it. Decades later, he still feels the weight of that night in every splash, every storm, every drop of water. And now, after a lifetime of silence, he finally gathers the courage to confess the story he has carried alone, because the truth has drowned him far longer than the ocean ever could. The core conflict of the story is a brutal race against time, a collapsing ship, rising water levels, and crushing ocean pressure threatening to kill everyone before the divers can reach them. Every second matters. The twisted corridors of the sunken hospital ship groan like a dying beast, and with every shift of metal, the narrator knows the structure is minutes away from imploding. The divers have to cut through beams, clear debris, and navigate total darkness, all while fighting the icy cold that numbs their fingers and slows their every movement. The trapped doctors are weakening, air pockets shrinking, and the ship's internal pressure warning them that the ocean is seconds from claiming everything. But the danger doesn't end with the sea. After the mission fails, the government quickly covers up the entire event to avoid political embarrassment during the war. The official report claims, all personnel died instantly after the mine blast. No survivors were reached. A statement the narrator knows is a lie because he held their hands, heard their cries, and watched them fight for life till their final moments. but the truth is buried, sealed away under classified documents and military threats. The families are told comforting falsehoods, and the world moves on. The twist comes from young Dr. Lee's final whisper. As the ship collapses and water floods around them, he uses his fading strength to tell the narrator, "If you tell them we kept working till the end." Not begging for help, not pleading for survival, just wanting the truth remembered. That sentence haunts the narrator for decades. For more than 60 years, he kept that whisper locked inside, believing the truth might only deepen the pain of the families. But now, with his own time nearly gone, he finally breaks the silence. He decides the world deserves to know what really happened, and that those doctors did not die instantly nor helplessly. They died fighting. In the end, the old diver's voice softens, trembling under the weight of everything he has carried for more than 60 years. He admits that survival was never a victory for him, only a sentence. "I survived, but part of me stayed in that ship," he whispers, as if confessing to the darkness itself. The voices of those trapped doctors still echo in his nights, rising from the depths whenever he closes his eyes. He reveals he never returned to the sea again. Even the sound of waves against a shore brings back the cold grip of that sinking vessel. But tonight he forces himself to speak, to finally unseal a truth buried beneath silence and shame. He records his confession not for pity, but so future generations will know what was hidden: the courage, the fear, the final breaths of those who kept working even as the ocean claimed them. And as his voice fades, he leaves one last broken line, a whisper shaped by years of sorrow. "The ocean keeps its dead, but it keeps their echoes even longer."